All right. So this is the Regular Baptist Podcast where we discuss biblical things from a regular Baptist perspective. And so last time we talked about what it means to be a regular Baptist. First episode, we talked about what it means to be a Baptist. And at the heart of what it means to be a Baptist is that concept of individual responsibility toward God, individual accountability. Some people call it soul liberty, like that, or freedom of conscience. And then we talked about last week what it means to be a regular Baptist, and that came out of a historical thing that happened in the early 20th century. And we talked about that and how at the heart of it, the regular Baptists were those who had a love for the truth. And because they had a love for the truth, they had to leave the Northern Baptist Convention. And then they started a group called the General Association of Regular Baptist Churches. And the whole term regular Baptist, it meant, to them, they were using it in the sense of like orthodox, as opposed to those who believe irregular doctrines or in an irregular way. And so they're saying that we are regular Baptists in that sense. And so what we need to do tonight is talk some more about this concept of love for the truth, because if you only see it as a one-sided thing, it can cause some problems. And by one-sided, if you're only seeing it in the sense of I love the truth so much, I'm going to separate from error, that can lead to problems if that's the only thing you're seeing about love for the truth and can give you a wrong idea. And so basically, a love for the truth has two sides to it. It has a negative side, which is that what we looked at last week, that need for separation from what's wrong, separation from error. And in particular, it was false teaching. It was error in the sense that is going contrary to the gospel and moving away from that and separating from those who were teaching false things. And so we saw that last week, 2 John, the book of 2 John, talks about that. And that's where John was writing to a lady, and it was over the issue of what to do if you had, back in those days, you had false teachers, spiritual teachers, religious teachers who would be coming around from city to city and would be preaching like evangelists like that. And in those days, instead of like staying in a hotel, they would stay in somebody's home. And so it was a common thing to show hospitality to one of those teachers coming through. And so John is writing to this lady because there were teachers who were claiming to be Christian, but were teaching things contrary to the truth, specifically the truth about who Jesus was. And so their doctrine of Christ was all messed up. And so John said, well, when they come and they want to come into your home, don't show hospitality to them. Because in doing so, to put them up in your home, you are actually contributing to their ministry. You're sharing in their error and what they're doing and leading people astray. And so he said, don't do that. So that's definitely a separation from error. Separate yourself from that error. And so if you love truth, you're going to hate falsehood. And you're going to hate error, right? It makes sense. If you love the truth, you're going to hate that. But so that's the negative side of it. But there's also a positive side. And the positive side is that if you love truth, you're going to have a desire for unity with those who also love truth. Right? So it's not just enough to see the negative side. You need to see the positive side of it as well. And so that's where we come to the epistle of 3 John. And 3 John is basically giving the other side and showing the positive side of a desire for unity. And so in the 3 John, John is writing to, in this case, not a lady, but a man, and who was also known for showing hospitality to preachers that were coming through. And in this case, John commends him for doing that. Because it's not false teachers, it's those who are teaching the truth. And you should help support them. And so 2 and 3 John really go together. They give both sides of a love for truth. And so let's look at the positive side in the epistle of 3 John. So he says, the elder unto the well-beloved Gaius, And so we have John, who is the elder, same way he addressed himself in 2nd John. And this time he's writing to this man, Gaius, who is well beloved, someone who John knows well and loves in the Lord. And so Gaius is this believer that John knows well. And so as we look through this book, we're going to see this love for truth displayed in that desire for unity. So let's look at John first and see his love for truth. So like in verse 1, he says, the elder unto the well-beloved Gaius, whom I love in the truth. So we see that John is combining, again, love, truth. The two things in John's mind go together. And he loves the truth, and he loves Gaius in the truth. Because, and I think that the idea behind that is that Gaius also loves the truth. And I love the truth. And so, of course, I would love Gaius because we both love the same truth. And in the Bible, unity is always based on truth. Unity in the Bible is not this corporate thing that you try to force people into. Unity in the Bible is people who believe the same things, loving each other because they believe the same things, the same core things. And they believe the same gospel. They trust the same Lord. They have the same Holy Spirit. And so this leads them to a desire for unity. And so he goes on in verse 2, he says, Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospereth. And so John, he's basically, it's their way of saying, I hope things are going well for you, Gaius, because he loves Gaius. For I rejoice greatly when the brethren came and testified of the truth that is in thee, even as thou walkest in the truth. And so John has heard about Gaius's love for the truth. There have been other people who have testified, and John has heard their testimony about this man Gaius, and that he's a stalwart guy. He loves the truth. He loves the gospel. He loves the Lord, and he's been doing well. And so John hears about this. He hears that the truth is in Gaius, and that Gaius is walking in truth. So in his heart, he's a man who loves truth, but he's also walking in it outwardly. And that can be seen in his life. And so in verse 4, he says, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. And so the thing that made John really happy was to hear that his children are walking in truth. And here, I wonder if Gaius is one of his children, so to speak. And I think in a spiritual sense. Maybe John led Gaius to the Lord. And when he hears that, this is a convert of John, somebody that he had the privilege of leading to the Lord, and when he hears that he's doing well, it just gives him joy. Anybody who's involved in ministry, if you lead someone to the Lord and you hear they're doing well, it gives you joy. Right? Because you have that desire for unity with them. And you want that to continue, and you love the same things, and you want them to be doing well in the Lord. And so John has that love for truth in a positive sense. Now we see that Gaius also has that. Look at verse 5. Beloved, thou doest faithfully whatsoever thou doest to the brethren and to strangers. And so John says he's heard about Gaius's testimony, and he's heard about what Gaius has been doing in walking in the truth. And he says what you're doing faithfully to the brethren and to strangers. And so John hears that Gaius has been showing hospitality to the brethren. I think those are the believers that he knows. And to the strangers. Those are the believers he doesn't know personally. They're strangers. They're foreign to him. And yet he has shown hospitality to them when he finds out that, they're believers too. And you've probably had that experience before in your own life where you've met someone who's a complete stranger to you, and you find out that they're a believer as well, and suddenly there's an instant bond there. And you might not even speak their language, but you know they're a believer as well, and there's an instant bond there. Because the deepest things, your core values, your core beliefs, they share. And so there's a bond. And so this is how Gaius was. He was very quick to show hospitality to those strangers that were coming through. In verse 6, he says, which have borne witness of thy charity before the church. He says, so these people, evidently, and maybe some of these strangers, have borne witness to Gaius's love, his charity, and they've done it before the church. And he says, whom if thou bring forward on their journey after a godly sort, thou shalt do well. And so John says, keep doing what you're doing. Keep helping them along in their journey as they travel around to minister for the Lord. Keep doing that. It's a good thing that he's doing. Verse 7, he says, because that for his name's sake they went forth, taking nothing of the Gentiles. So the people that he had helped didn't need to earn money on their own because people like Gaius were helping them along. They didn't have to have support from the world, right? They got it from the believers. It says they took nothing of the Gentiles. So then in verse 8, John says, we therefore ought to receive such that we might be fellow helpers to the truth. So John says we should receive people like this, those who are preaching the truth, those who are going around ministering for the Lord. We should receive them, we should welcome them, show hospitality to them, so that we can be fellow helpers to them in the truth. So it's the opposite of what 2 John said. Right? 2 John said, don't show hospitality to the false teachers because you will be helping them in their error. But you do show hospitality to the true teachers because you'll be helping them in the truth. So it's like the opposite. One's the negative side, one's the positive side. And then we see also there's a man down a little bit further toward the end of the book, Demetrius, who also had a love for truth. It says, Demetrius, in verse 12, hath good report of all men and of the truth itself. Yea, and we also bear record, and ye know that our record is true. And so he just points out this man, Demetrius, who is evidently also has a love for the truth. He has a testimony of that. And John it appears like he's recommending to Gaius, show this man hospitality too. He's somebody that I know who is loving the truth. And so in this epistle, when you see believers who are both loving the truth, they have a unity there. And that's how it's supposed to be, right? That's what heaven will be like, right? Because in heaven, there won't be any error to separate from. It'll only be truth. And everyone will be loving the truth, and so there'll be perfect unity. Okay. So, love for truth actually unites people when they both love the truth. Okay? If somebody is not a lover of truth, if somebody is a lover of error, then truth will divide them, right? But if they both love the truth, it will unite them like nothing else will. Psalm 119, verse 63, David in that psalm says that he is a companion of all that fear the Lord. And so it's that sense of, if they fear the Lord like me, I'm a companion with them. It breeds a unity there. Now, with all that said, there is a danger that comes with a love for the truth. And the danger that comes with it is this: love for the truth. And if you love the truth so much that you would be willing to separate from error, it tends to attract people who would also claim to have a love for the truth, but it's almost the kind of narcissistic kind of people. And what I mean by narcissistic is that word gets overused today, but it's basically somebody who is primarily concerned about their own self-promotion. Okay, they're concerned about themselves, they're concerned about promoting themselves, and they're always right, like that. And so there's a biblical example of this in 3 John in verse 9. Now, John says, I wrote unto the church, but Diotrephes. Okay, here's this guy, Diotrephes. And notice what he says about him. Who loveth to have the preeminence among them, receiveth us not. So here's this man, Diotrephes, and the thing about him is not a love for the truth. What's it a love for? A love for preeminence. That can often mask itself as a love for truth, but they're different things. And so he had a love for preeminence, and what it led him to do was to not receive John. Okay, so here's a guy who, the way I picture it, is Diotrephes is so holy, he thinks he's holier than John. Okay, and so he separates from the apostle John because he thinks John's not holy enough. And Gaius as well, because he thinks Gaius is not holy enough. We see in verse 10, he says, "Wherefore, if I come, I will remember his deeds which he doeth, prating against us with malicious words, and not content therewith, neither doth he himself receive the brethren, and forbiddeth them that would, and casteth them out of the church." And so here's how he acted. He spoke against John and Gaius. It says, prating against us. And that word prating has the idea of just babbling nonsense. And so he was speaking untrue things, wrong things about John and about Gaius. And you can just try to imagine what kind of wrong things this man would have come up with. And then he's uses malicious words, and he's not content with that. Not just, separating himself from John and from Gaius, but he also says, neither doth he himself receive the brethren. So the other believers too. It seems like this man couldn't have unity with anybody. And then he takes it a step further, and forbiddeth them that would. So there are people like in a church, and they say, no, John's a good guy, right? We want to receive John and Gaius. We love them in the truth. And Diotrephes says no. And if you're going to receive John and Gaius, I can't be part of you either. And then it says, and casteth them out of the church. So he was excommunicating people because they were wanting to show hospitality to John. Okay, this is like going way too far, isn't it? And if you would have asked Diotrephes, he would have said, I love the truth. That's why I'm doing this. But John says, no, it's not about a love for truth. It's about a love for preeminence. And that's a different thing. And so John says in verse 11, Beloved, follow not that which is evil, but that which is good. He that doeth good is of God, but he that doeth evil hath not seen God. And I think John's implying that this man Diotrephes, he's claiming to be good, he's claiming to be spiritual, and he's not. It's all about a love for preeminence. And so there's a danger that comes with love for the truth. It attracts people like Diotrephes. It just does that. And in a church, if you're a church that stands for the truth and you love the truth, you will attract sometimes people like Diotrephes. That will happen. And here's the reason why. Okay, it's kind of like a religious narcissism, where somebody who is like that and has this love for preeminence and is kind of narcissistic in a religious way, they will share some similarities with people who love the truth. Here's some of the similarities they share. Very confident in what they believe. Right? Confident in their ideas. And so they see somebody who loves the truth, and loving the truth, you say, yes, I know the Bible is the Word of God. I know this is what the Scripture says. Here's what the gospel is. I know these things to be true. And he's like, oh, yeah, I recognize that kind of confidence. I'm like that too. And then they will be bold in promoting their ideas. So be very confident in their ideas, very self-confident. And they'll also be very bold about it. And so they'll be very outspoken about it. They'll be quick to take a stand for their ideas, no matter what anybody else says. And they'll be ready to fight for their ideas. And so there's some similarities there, but there's a huge difference. And the difference is between loving the truth And so therefore also loving unity with those who love the truth and loving the preeminence, which means not loving unity with anybody unless they follow you. You see the difference there? There are some similarities, but at the heart, there's a big difference between the two. So you can have a person who is kind of narcissistic like that, and they'll see other people who love the truth, or they'll see a church where people love the truth, and they go there and they are assuming that everyone else is like them. And they're not seeing it. And they're assuming, oh, that this church also loves the preeminence. That's why they do these things. That's why they take a stand on this issue. That's why they separate from error. It's because they love the preeminence like I do. And they're not understanding, no, it's about a love for truth. That's a different thing. So let me give you a historical example of this. So in the regular Baptist movement, in history and regular Baptist movement, there was two figures. You had early on in the regular Baptist movement, there was a pastor named Bob Ketchum, and he was one of the early leaders. And he was a preacher from the Midwest. He preached and pastored several different churches in the Midwest. He left the Northern Baptist Convention. One of his early churches he was in Pennsylvania, and it was part of that Northern Baptist Convention. He pulled his church out of there because he loved the truth. He became an early president. He wasn't the first one, but an early president of the General Association of Regular Baptist Churches. And as an early president, he was a good leader. And so people looked up to him and respected him in that sense. And so after that, he also they changed the structure of the organization. At first, there was a president and then vice president and things like that. And he was actually one that suggested they change it because they were going to elect him another time to be president. And he was like, I don't want this to be a one-man show. And he was afraid that was what was happening. And so he said, what we need to do is change the whole structure. Let's do away with president, vice president, and the structure that it has today. Instead, he says, let's elect a council of men. And this council then will elect a representative, somebody to represent the churches, but without authority. So that's what he became. He became the representative for the GRBC for a lot of years after that. His favorite verse was Colossians 1:18. And when he was a young man, he was looking for a verse to follow that would guide him through his early ministry. And he came on Colossians 1:18, and it says, talking about Christ, and he is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things he might have the preeminence. And so his whole thing that guided his ministry was that Christ would have the preeminence. He wasn't always perfect in that, obviously, but that was kind of his goal. He wanted to make sure Christ had the preeminence and not himself. And here's a statement that he made when they were wanting to elect him as president again and again. He said, if I thought for one moment that either the nominating committee or this body was naming me to the presidency because they honestly felt that I was the only man that could fill this position, you would have my resignation instantly. There are many men who are as worthy and capable as I can ever hope to be. If I thought you were naming me as the president of this association because you think I am a great man, I would walk from this platform now. I have said and been honestly sincere in the saying of it, that there are no great men among us. We are all little men with a great God. And that was kind of his thing that he would always say. There are no great men in this organization, in this association, only little men with a great God. And that was kind of the thing that he would always say. Now you compare that with another man, J. Frank Norris. I've mentioned him before. And he was a preacher from Texas around the same time. He had discovered early on in his ministry that if you started preaching in a more sensationalistic way, saying controversial things, that he could draw a big crowd that way. And so he started doing that. He would bring politics into the pulpit all the time. He would call out people in their city council. He was a pastor in Fort Worth, Texas. And so he would call out businessmen and things like that. And he was always trying to do something that would be sensationalistic. And he was good at it. People called him the Texas Tornado because of the way he preached. And he loved a good fight. And people said that about him. At one point, a little later in his ministry, he actually became the pastor of 2 churches. By the way, his church, they were more, since they were in the South, he was dealing more with the Southern Baptists. Their church also, there's some discrepancy. Did he pull his church out of the Southern Baptists, or was he kicked out? Some people say they actually kicked his church out because he was causing too much trouble, but I don't know. But anyway, they left the Southern Baptist Convention. And so it was similar to what was happening in the North. He actually became a pastor of 2 churches at the same time, the church in Fort Worth, and then there was a church up in Detroit called Temple Baptist Church. And he became the pastor of that church too. And he told them, I can't be here all the time. They're like, that's okay. Just travel back and forth, come up here when you want to. And so he would have assistant pastors under him at both places who would fill in when he was gone. And he did that for quite some time, a number of years. Temple Baptist Church in Detroit pulled out of the Northern Baptist Convention. And at that point, that's right around the time the regular Baptists were starting. And so Norris was kind of wanted to be part of the regular Baptist movement as well. And so some of the early meetings, he would come and be there for the meetings. And at one point, one of the differences is the regular Baptist, it was an association of churches. Some other groups were associations of pastors. But with regular Baptists, it was the whole idea was, no, it's a church has to join, not just the pastor. And he was kind of more of the mindset that the pastor joins and the church follows. And so he would come and want to be part of it, tried to join the GRBC in an improper way without going through the proper channels to bring the church in. And when they rebuffed him, he became very angry. And he would proceed to attack them, especially Ketchum. He had a real thing against him. And there's a lot of issues or reasons why, but there was this real thing he had against him. He would send him letters where they would, we don't have anything quite like it today, but mail where they would have a delivery guy come and give it to you personally. Like, I guess sort of like registered mail like that. And he would time it so that the letters would come before Ketchum was supposed to preach on Sunday morning, just to try to rattle him. And it would say all these, rude things and, bad things about it. I think there's an example there. He was a man who loved the preeminence. I don't know what his heart was. I don't know if he was a believer or just faking it, or I have no idea. But he certainly seemed to love the preeminence. And I think there was a difference between just a love for the truth and a love to try to put yourself forward. And yet at first, on the surface, it seems like they both had the same thing. But there was a difference there. And so that love for the truth can easily attract people who have a love for preeminence. Because on the surface, sometimes it looks the same. But you start digging deeper and suddenly there's not that love for other people who love the truth and that desire for unity that's there. When somebody loves the truth, it's not like they're not gleeful about separating from other people. It's not a game. It's not competition or something like that. It grieves them that they have to do it. If you separate from somebody and it doesn't grieve you to do that, there might be a bit of love of preeminence in there instead of love for truth. And so we need to be aware of confusing the two things. In other people, beware that because we're a church that does take a stand for truth, that there might be those who are attracted to it and thinking it's a love for preeminence. But also be aware of it in ourselves. Because our flesh can slide back into that love for preeminence instead of love for truth. And if we hate false teaching, we need to make sure it's combined with just as much love for those who teach the truth. And it's not just a selfish thing or trying to put yourself forward and put other people down, that kind of thing. So, any questions or comments about that, this whole idea? Everyone's either very much understand everything or very confused.
I got one. Could you just explain a little bit more about love going together with truth, like you brought up at the beginning?
Yeah. So John always seems to combine them. I think sometimes what can happen is in our day, there can be those who can feel like they're very loving, and because they're so loving, they excuse all kinds of things. And it's not really loving, it's really enabling people to do things that are wrong. And so sometimes people confuse a tolerance of evil with love, right? And John never did that. John's saying no, that it's not about when he's talking about love, it's based on truth. Love in 1 Corinthians 13, it says love rejoices in the truth. Right? And so it's that sense that truth being what we know to be real about God, what we know to be real about Scripture, what the Bible teaches. And true love delights in that. And it is completely consistent with that. Because God is, right? So God is a God of truth. He's also a God of love. And both things go completely together in God, in the nature of God, and they're not divided at all. They're completely consistent with one another. And is that sort of?
Yeah, sort of. What does he mean when he says that he's happy when his children are walking in truth? What does it mean to walk in truth?
To be doing right, to have right doctrine. Okay, that's one thing. And I think especially in the context of this, where there were errors that were coming in, and he sees that his children are not falling prey to that. They're holding fast to the truth about who Jesus, about what salvation is. And so I think that makes him happy. Okay, to know that they're not getting swayed by what false teachers are saying. And then I think there's also just the consistency of Christian character and conduct that goes along with the truth. Because truth is not ever just about doctrine. It's also about how that's practically carried out in your life. Right? So if you only have a doctrine in your head and it doesn't affect your life in any way, are you really believing that doctrine? Right? So you're not believing it in a way that affects you. And so it's both of those things, that holding to that right doctrine, but having that right doctrine actually affect your life. I think that's what he's rejoicing in. All right. Anybody else? Okay, we got a chat question here.
How would one separate themselves politely? For instance, would the woman who was told not to show hospitality tell the person specifically why they were not welcome in her home?
Yeah, that's a good question. How do you do that politely? Yeah. How do you do that without being completely rude? And I think right. So you tell them why. Yeah, I would. If a false teacher was coming, in our context, it's not so much somebody coming to your door and saying, "Hey, can you show hospitality to me? I'm a traveling preacher coming through. Can you help me in that way?" It would be more like, "Hey, I'm coming nearby your church. Can you have me speak?" And I'll have things like that happen sometimes, or I'll get an email from somebody, "Hey, can I come and speak in your church?" or something to that effect. And I kind of want to find out where they're coming from, right? And so if it's somebody where their doctrine is off and enough so that we're off on basic doctrines, I'll tell them that. No, sorry, we hold to this here, and you're not in agreement with that. And I would say this. I mean, I would assume, since you don't agree with our doctrine, you wouldn't want to come here and preach, right? And if you would, I'm thinking this: if you would, why? If I wouldn't want to go preach in a church that I was completely, their doctrine is completely off from mine either. So I think honesty is the best. Tell them, as in a kind way, but no, we don't agree on this. Yes.
I think along with that too, there's a difference in like a church separation and like saying not having someone come preach or stay in their home and partake in the ministry or financially support their ministry. But we sometimes will have friendships and family members that we're still in fellowship with who believe in the Bible, but they leave, but some of their doctrine is different.
Right.
And like with that, it's not, you don't necessarily, as you're saying, don't have to cut off every friendship, cut off every relationship. Our culture is really quick now to cut people out completely.
Right.
And so there's different levels of fellowshipping, working together, ministering together.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, there's lots of different levels, right? What is error? At what point is something error, right? I think you have the basics, what we call the fundamentals of the faith. And early on, like with our association of churches, before they pulled out of the Northern Baptist Convention, there was some booklets that were published called the Fundamentals. And some businessmen in LA published it and sent them around to churches. And basically there's a whole series of pamphlets, actually more like little booklets. And they would have preachers from all different around the country, and they would write about some particular topic that were these fundamentals of the faith. And by the fundamentals, they meant the things that, if you're going to be a Christian, you need to believe these things. And so things like the virgin birth of Christ, or that Jesus was truly God, that Jesus died a substitutionary death, and things like this. And so there's that level of things. And so if you're dealing with somebody who doesn't believe one of the fundamentals of the faith, you're like, I don't know if they're even a Christian, right? And so that's one level of separation. I can't work with them. But then there are other levels, things like baptism, where you can believe in infant baptism and still be a believer because you still believe the gospel. And it's not a gospel issue, but it is an issue of how you're obeying Christ, a discipleship issue. And for us, we would say, well, no, you can't. That's important enough of a thing. It's not a gospel thing, but it's an important enough matter that if you have someone as a member of our church who doesn't agree on baptism, it's going to cause a lot of confusion, and it's going to cause problems in the church. And so we feel that that's a big enough belief that you couldn't be a member of the church without believing like we do in baptism. So that's where our doctrinal statement covers more than just the fundamentals of the faith. It covers some other things that we feel are important enough doctrines that we can't work together in that sense. I mean, you might be able to work together in other areas, but as we can't be united as a church in that, as a local church. And then there are other issues where, like, for instance, with us, our doctrinal statement doesn't address, but there are issues where people have disagreements sometimes. And so you can have people in our church that have disagreements on certain things, but we agree on the doctrinal statement, those basic things. And so there are different levels like that, of truth and error, possibly. Error on one of these lesser things. Lesser is not the right word because they're all important, but something that's not a gospel-related issue. Error in that sense is not the same as error in a gospel-related issue, if that makes sense. And so you're trying to sort that all out. And you can have a friend that you're good friends with that believes in baptizing babies. Okay, and you can be good friends with them, but there's some things you're not going to be able to do with them. And so I think that's kind of how you deal with some of those issues. The thing I'm always looking for is, where's the person's heart? Does the person love the Lord or not? Okay, they may not agree on some of these other things that I think they're confused about, right? And they probably think I'm confused about. But where's their heart? Do they love the Lord? Do they believe the gospel? And if so, I'm going to be able to work with them on some level and have fellowship with them on some level. But then as you agree on doctrinal issues, you can have more and more fellowship together, and it's not hindered. So, hope that makes sense. All right. Yes, Andrew. Yes, one more.
Could you remind us where we can find the doctrinal statement again?
Yeah, our doctrinal statement's right on our church website. I forget what page it's on, but you can, I mean, it's pretty easy to find on there. I think it says beliefs or something to that effect. So it's right on our website.
And then I had one more question. If there is somebody in a church who is like Diotrephes, or they love the preeminence, how do you deal with that as a church member?
It blows up usually. Yeah, no, if you have somebody like a Diotrephes, it's gonna be hard. It will come out at some point. A lot of times the Diotrephes will separate from you, so they'll leave. So that can happen. If it's somebody who is persistent in that and they're wanting to push the pastor out or something like that, then there's going to have to be deal with church discipline and all that kind of stuff. So
If they were in some kind of leadership, maybe not the pastor, but if they were involved in leadership in some way as just a regular member of the church, would that be a reason to leave the church, or would you want to stay and try to help to make things right?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, my first thought would be to try to stay and see what happens. But if it's something that over a period of time is not dealt with, and you can see that, you might have to leave. Yeah, that's going to be a different each issue. Each time something like that happens each case is going to be different. So, yeah. All right. Well, that's the end of our podcast. Thank you very much for listening, watching.